Hi, it's Frank from Mann Lake, and today we're going to talk about running single deeps. Now, when I started beekeeping, the conventional wisdom was you always ran 2 deeps, and then everything else is a honey super above that. And as I got older, number one, it was a lot more work, and number two, what I realized was when I had a hive that died over winter, when I went into that dead out in the springtime, normally that top deep was full of honey, and not only was it full, it was crystallized honey, so I couldn't even get it out of the comb. I had to just use it to feed it back to the bees. And I got to thinking, well, and some of those bees died, they were alive as late as January, and they hadn't touched that honey. So I got to thinking about it and reading about it, and realized that we can run single deeps up in the north here. They do it a lot down south anyway. So I started doing it over the last couple of years, and I know a lot of friends of mine do the same thing. Now, the method I use is what I call the modified single deep, which I'll talk about in a minute. But when we come into spring, now I did split this colony, but it's really strong. I've got a whole month before my major flow starts. That's at least one full brood cycle. And these bees already are filling these frames with capped brood. So there's a good chance if I just put a queen excluder on this hive and put my honey supers on, there's a good chance it'll swarm anyway, even though I split it because it was a very strong colony. The way I run single deeps is, now put a few things out there. When your bees swarm, they don't swarm on the hard flow. They actually swarm just before the big flow starts. They start thinking about swarming weeks before they actually swarm. So these bees could start thinking about it, and right as my major flow comes, they'll go. So what I like to do is take that thought away from them so they have no intention of swarming. How do I do that and still run a single deep? That's where I say my modified comes in there. So number one, if this hive were a lot weaker, if I went through this colony and I found maybe only 5 frames of brood or less, I would think we'll be fine. By the time the flow comes, it'll be good. They won't swarm on me. But these guys have a lot of brood. So I think there's a possibility they could swarm. So the way I do mine is like this. And again, we all do things differently. So this is not the gospel, but I encourage people to try a lot of different methods. This one, whatever you want. I'm going to take this box here. I'm going to add a super of drawn comb. At the moment, this is not drawn, but I would add a super of drawn comb right here. I'd put my queen excluder on. What does that do? That gives bees room to lay in here. Do I care if they lay in my honey super? Not really. I use the same honey supers for this method every year. And as the comb eventually gets darker and and I don't want to extract it anymore, I will change the foundation out. I'll just pop out the plastic, put new foundation in there, and I still have those frames. So what I've done here, I've made sure that my bees, number one, they're strong enough, but they shouldn't swarm. Insurance, I've given them this extra box. So right now, this medium is going to serve as a brood box. On top of this, I'm going to add honey supers like this, and then I'm going to put my lid on here. And I'm going to wait. Now as I get closer to the beginning of June, I know my flow is, the major flow is going to come in. I'll start looking in these colonies up in here, and when I see a lot of open wet nectar in the cells, down in the brood chamber, I know that flow is on. I see that white wax on top of the frames, really white wax that they make on top of the frames. I know we're in a flow. I'm going to come back and do this. I'm going to take these honey supers off, take this queen excluder off, and I'm going to shake all the bees out of here. Just shake them all off so this has no bees in it. And then all it's going to have in here is brood and whatever nectar and pollen they put in here. I'm going to come back. I'm going to put this on. Now what's going to happen? And I'll put these honey supers back on top. If we know our biology of honeybees, we know that it's 21 days for a worker bee from egg to emergence. For a drone, it's 24. Well, if I do this right at the beginning of the June when my flow starts, my flow ends about the first week of July. So by then, all these bees would have hatched out of there, and the workers will backfill that with honey. So I'll get 3 supers of honey. That's a very easy way to run this way. What I do through the rest of the season is I run with 1 deep through my dearth. I feed, take care of them. And when I get to my fall flow, I actually do it a little different. In the fall, I will go into winter like this. I'll let them fill this up. I might feed them syrup. I want them to go into winter with a deep and a medium. So just to make sure they have enough. Now what happens come springtime? When we come into springtime, we're going to have brood in that top box again. And the bees are likely to think about swarming possibly. When they get a lot of young nurse bees, that's one of the many triggers that causes swarming. And there'll be a lot of young nurse bees in here and a lot of brood in the springtime. Well, what I do for that is if I don't want to make a split, I've already got them in this configuration right here. Instead of splitting my bees, I separate my bees, which is called the Demari method, or Demari, I'm not sure. I will come in here in the springtime and I'll do the same thing. I don't want another hive, but I don't want this hive to swarm on me, and I want to continue as a single deep. Again, I'll shake all the bees off of these frames, so there's nothing in here but brood and pollen, a little bit of nectar. I'm going to put this queen excluder on, and I'm going to put this back on for 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever. All the nurse bees are going to come back into this top box. So now I've got the queen in the bottom because I shook them all down. I've got brood up here, but the nurse bees came back up on it. This box is full of nurse bees, brood, everything. After 2 hours, I'm going to come back. I'm going to take this box off. I'm going to put those boxes back on. I use a second queen excluder and I put it up here. And I'm going to put that box back on. And I'm putting the lid on. What have I done? I've separated the majority of the brood, because most of it's in this top box in the springtime. The queen's going to work her way down. I've separated the majority of the brood and the majority of the nurse bees from the rest of the bees. So they're going to think down here they swarmed. These bees up here are going to think they're queenless. So what they're going to do is they're going to start making queen cells in here. Now this method is great because you end up right when the flow starts, you've got a lot of bees and they're going to make you a lot of honey. Instead of swarming like they normally would, they're here, they're staying here. They're going to make you a lot of honey. The one thing you have to be aware of is because these bees are separated. Now I only have 2 honey supers in between. Sometimes I'll put 3 in here and then this brood box on top. They're going to not have much of that queen pheromone. They're going to think they're queenless. Any of that brood in there they can make a queen from. They're going to start making queen cells. So when you do this, you've got to say, okay, the oldest larva they can use to make a queen is a 2-day-old larva. So that means 3 days is an egg, 2 days is a larva, that's 5 days. Queens emerge in about 15.5 days. So we know if we wait 10 days, that those queens that they're raising are going to hatch. So I usually come back in 7 days, and I'm going to take the lid off. I'm going to go through all these frames and destroy all these queen cells. I'm going to wait. I'm going to come back another week, check them again. And if there's no queen cells there, I'm going to take this off. I'm going to take this queen excluder off and put it back on like that. Now, hopefully, we're into our major flow. We've got a lot more bees. They don't want to swarm, and we make a lot of honey. So that's pretty much the single brood chamber method. Most of the year I run in single deeps. You know, I have a medium under there once in a while. I move it up to the top, or I move it way to the very top if I want to do the demery. Depends what my goals are. You know, you have to look at yourself and say, what are my goals as a beekeeper? And you decide how you're going to do that. Now I do overwinter occasionally in 2 double deeps. I'll put them on, I'll run single deeps through the spring, summer. When my fall flow comes, I'll throw on maybe a 2nd deep onto a colony, let them fill it and raise brood in there. Why? Because that's another source of mine to make splits in the springtime. So they're for my splits when I run doubles. If I'm not going to make splits, if I don't need to make a lot in the spring, I don't think, I'm going to do the majority this way. A deep and a medium over winter. The other ones, if I want to make a few splits, they'll be double deeps. But once I get into spring and I want to make honey, I'm going to go to a single deep. And like I said, I call it modified because there's a short period of time where I have this medium serving as a brood box, but then I move it up top above the queen excluder and I let the bees backfill it with honey as the brood emerges. It's really fairly simple. Yeah, it takes a little more work, but it's not heavy work. It's not like lifting that deep box that's got brood and a lot of nectar in it and moving it around and then wasting that when you get a dead out over winter. You're going to get more honey and you're going to get honey that's not crystallized, honey that you can use. We got to remember, you think, well, I could leave honey for the bees. Honey only keeps our bees alive. They don't really raise brood off of it. So there's no sense leaving a lot of extra honey for our bees. We could feed them syrup, we could put fondant on there, we could put winter patties. There's no need to run double deeps. Maybe if you're way, way up north, that may be different. The colder it is in wintertime, the more honey the bees use. So if you're way up north, you may want to still run doubles. I'm here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and I actually overwintered a lot of bees this year in 5/5 nukes, a total of 10 frames with honey in them, and I overwintered those bees. They use a lot less than we think, especially when it's not a really harsh winter. So it's a way to change your beekeeping, take a lot of that weight off of your back, get a little more honey, and keep your bees from swarming at the same time. Hopefully you learned something from this. If you have any questions, just ask us and we'll be happy to answer for them. I say give it a try. I think you'll be happy with it, and it's kind of neat. It really is a lot of fun watching them do all of that. If you like this video, please subscribe. And if you got any thoughts or ideas on what you'd like to see us do more of, let us know. We'll do that as well. Thank you.